Hello everyone. I would like to look at solving equations and then look at finding the zeros of a linear equation. Now, for most of y'all, this will be uh, a review, and hopefully so. I'm not spending much time on solving equations. But the main premise for solving an equation is that you want to isolate the variable. You want to get whatever letter is in your equation. And for the ones that I've strictly used x because primarily we're dealing with graphing and the x and y axes. So I want to isolate the variable. So I'm looking at isolating x, getting x by itself. That means nothing else with it, not a negative sign or a number. And I do that by performing opposite operations. And what I mean by opposite is if there's multiplication occurring, I'm going to divide or multiply by the reciprocal. If there's addition or subtraction going on, I'm going to look at subtracting or adding. My goal is to first look at, can I add or subtract first? And whenever I add or subtract, what number I'm trying to create? I'm trying to create a zero. Okay, trying to create the number 0 by doing that. The next thing I'm going to look at is multiplying or dividing. Multiplying or dividing. And the number that I'm trying to create whenever I multiply or divide is 1. And really what I'm doing is I'm doing the opposite of the order of operations in solving for these. I'm going to take the opposite of PEMDAS. Parentheses, exponent, multiply, divide, add, or subtract. And really what I'm looking at is adding or subtracting and then multiplying or dividing first. Now whenever I have parentheses though, it's a little different. I have to get rid of the parentheses first before I do anything. So if you would like, pause the video and solve the three equations and find the value of x that makes each equation true and see if we get the same answers. Alright, so let's look at the first one. So the first thing I'm going to do is think of, I need to get x by itself. So I'm going to look to add or subtract first. I'm going to do the opposite. So this is a plus 2, so I'm going to say minus 2 or subtract 2. 2 minus 2 is 0, so I just pull down my 5x, and what I do to one side of the equation, I have to do to the other. Now, I look at this and I say, okay, there's multiplication occurring between the 5 and the x. When a coefficient and a variable are next to each other, it's understood multiplication. Opposite of multiplying is dividing, or multiplying by the reciprocal. I will choose to do multiplying by the reciprocal. I'm going to multiply both sides by 1/5. The 5's cancel, leaving an x. I created a 1 there. And 10 times 1/5 is 2. X equals 2. And do you remember from working with equations, what you can always do is plug in your answer. You can evaluate it. You can evaluate for x equals 2 into your original equation. So 5 times, and I replace x with the value of 2 because that's what I'm saying, x is 2. X is equal to 2. Plus 2 should equal 12. So that is 10 plus 2 equals 12. 12 equals 12. That is correct. Let's look at the next one. Ooh, I have fractions. So what I need to do is I need to go ahead and multiply through by a number that will cancel both of those out. And what I can do is find the least common denominator. The least common denominator for 2 and 5 is 10. If I multiply through everything in here by 10, meaning I'm going to distribute that 10 to all the terms inside the parentheses, I will get rid of my fractions. So what I'm left with is 10 times 1/2 x minus 10 times 4 is equal to 10 times 3/5. Really, all I'm doing by doing this, I'm getting rid of the fractions, which makes the math easier to work. I'm just scaling this line up by 10. It will still be the same line whenever I'm done. 10 times 1/2 is 5x. 10 times 4 is 40. 10 times 3/5 is 6. Now I'm back to how I was up here. I turn around and let's see, I do the opposite. So it was subtraction, so I'm going to add, or a negative, so I'm going to make it positive. It gives me a 0, so I just drop down my 5x. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. Multiplication is occurring, so therefore I divide. 5's make a 1, and I will just leave this as an improper fraction. Again, I can evaluate for x being 46/5, plug it back into the equation and solve to check my answer. I'm not going to do that for the sake of time. Here I've given one that has parentheses. I have to remove the parentheses. After I remove the parentheses, I can do everything else that I did here. So I need to distribute my 1/6. So 1/6 times 12x is 2x, and 1/6 times 18 is 3. Parentheses are now gone, and this is what I'm left with. Look to add or subtract first. I want to make a 0. I need to get this x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 3, or this was a positive 3, so I'm going to do a negative 3. And that gives me the value of 0, so I just drop 2x down. And a negative 3 minus 3 is a negative 6. Divide both sides by 2, or multiply by 1/2. X equals a negative 3. Again, I can check my answer by taking the negative 3, plugging it into the equation. So, this is a basic review on how to solve equations. I want to take that knowledge that we have then for solving equations and simply look at finding the zeros of linear equations. Finding zeros is the same for any type of equation that you have, quadratic, cubic, on up. It's the same thing. What you're doing is you're finding the zeros are where the graph intersects the x-axis. You're looking at all the points x, 0 where that graph intersects the x-axis. Well, for linear equations, it should only graph once. It's intersect the x-axis once because it's a straight line. It's not a curved line. There's no curvature. And what we're looking at is the formula y equals mx plus b, and we write it in function notation. F of x equals mx plus b. And what we're looking at, this is the value of y. See, value of y? This is the value of y, just written in function notation. So what I'm actually saying is, okay, y equals 0. Such that I end up with this equation, 0 equals mx plus b. So if you want, pause the video, solve these two, see if you find the 0 for these two graphs, or these two linear equations. We're also going to look at it in graphical form also. Okay, so I know I need to just make that be 0. And this goes right back to solving equations. I want to isolate x, find out what x actually equals. So minus 12 minus 12, mean negative 12 equals, these two cancel, become 0. Divide or multiply by the reciprocal. So that's what I'm looking at. This is my 0. What I know this is it's this coordinate. This is where that line strikes the x-axis. That is a 0. 0 of let's look at the next one. So I make f of x equals 0. Add 18 to both sides. I can multiply by the reciprocal to cancel out 3/4. So what I will say is, and I'll rewrite it here, 4/3 times 18, and I'll put it over 1 to help us be able to see and visualize. And then 4/3 times 3/4 equals x. See, these cancel out, leaving me with just x. That's why I multiplied by the reciprocal. Here, we can go ahead and cross simplify. That becomes a 1, and 3 will go into 18, what, 9 times? Nope. How many times? 6. And now my denominators are 1, so I multiply the numerators together, 24. This is my 0. The 0 for this equation, 0, is 24 comma 0. So let's look at that. Okay, so for the first one, I said that the coordinate was 2 comma 0. So let's pull up some Desmos and plug in what we have. So I have, and we can type it in as this, I believe f of x equals a negative 6x plus 12, right? Negative 6x plus 12. Very good. That's my equation, and this is what we get. And look at there, right there. That's my 0. That's where it intersects the x-axis. That's what a 0 is. Again, I replace f of x with the value of 0 and solve for the value of x. That gives me 2. So our other equation was 3/4 x minus 18. Right? Well, I got to put in here f of x is equal to that. It's not on my graph. So let's zoom out. Hey, there it is. All the way over here, and look at that. I have a value of 24 comma 0. That is the 0 for this equation. That is where this equation intersects the x-axis. And again, zeros will be used for quadratics. Zeros will be used for cubic equations. To find the 0, simply take the equation that you're given and set it equal to 0 and solve. Alright guys, good luck on your homework. Continue to watch those videos from the publishers to help you work your problems.